right path. Thanks everyone for joining us for this Small Business Month presentation for Ready Set Tender. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks so much for joining me on a Friday. Hopefully you've got some lunch, and we'll kick off. So just to let you know a couple of housekeeping things. I'm recording the session. I will put it up on my YouTube channel so people can access it. We will take some Q&As at the end, so pop your questions and answers in the Q&A section, and I'll answer those at the end. I really hope to be done in the hour, so certainly we'll go from there. But I will also send you out a copy of these slides afterwards, and some other bits and pieces that we discuss throughout. But we should get going. So welcome. I'd like to just to pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and particularly anybody on this call today. And for those of you who I haven't met, I know that some of the people on the call are part of, I'm going to say, the Tender Training College community and are subscribers. But I'm Kate Burrows, and I am the founder and the managing director of the Tender Training College. So I started the college in 2017, after having worked in tenders since about 2003. And the one reason I started the college was because there was really no training for people wanting to know how to tender. And I was a consultant who worked in large organisations, helping businesses to write and submit their tenders. So some of the large tenders that I worked on would include things like the Sydney Light Rail, a lot of public transport, construction tenders. So recently I've done the Warringah Freeway in New South Wales. I've done some hydro energy tenders, but really large jobs where a lot of people were subject matter experts, either engineers or accountants, and were thrown into the tender team and trying to work out what on earth it was that they were meant to do. And it's exactly the same, or probably even more challenging for small business, because often you might be the one person that's actually putting the whole thing together, or part of a small team that are actually trying to work out what on earth that you're supposed to do in these tenders. I am a small business owner. I understand that the small business environment has probably been, I would say, probably the toughest it's been in the last couple of years, with all the things that we've had to deal with. And I can understand why tendering represents such an attractive opportunity for your business and to grow it in a sustainable way. So what I'm aiming to do today is to give you as much information as possible to really give you a clear and transparent understanding of what tendering is about and whether or not your business is ready and what it maybe needs to get ready. So let's kick off. So we're going to cover three separate sections: ready, set, and tender. And in the ready section, we'll start with really just a quick background of tenders and the procurement overview. And why you are here, because you are representing the supply side of tendering. You want to potentially win government or private sector contracts from governments or businesses. So there are two sides of procurement. Today we're going to focus on the supply side and what you need to do to be a successful supplier. So who are our buyers? Well, traditionally they're governments, all levels of government, and they're private businesses as well. So they could be public companies, not-for-profits, just move myself, and other private businesses. And the federal government releases something in the order of about 80,000 tenders every year. So you can imagine that the advice I'm going to give you today is applicable across the board. It's applicable to what you see typically in tenders. But I guess while your tendering journey is going to be unique, every single tender that you pick up will be different and unique. And that is because the party that's issued the tender, and I like to call them the client, will have really unique objectives and requirements for that particular tender. And that's what makes tendering, I think, really interesting. It's trying to understand what it is that that client really wants to achieve, and what does good look like for them if you're the preferred supplier and you're delivering the contract. And we all know AI is, it's here to stay in whatever form, and it's changing the way we tender. But at the end of the day, what is the core principle that we follow, or I follow as a tendering expert, is really trying to understand what is it that our client wants when they're issued a tender, and how can we help best meet their requirements. So often we think about, if you like, the tender document that gets issued to us through some sort of electronic portal or email, arrives on our desk, and we have to determine whether or not we're going to tender for it. But what we don't see is the background work that goes in by the client to prepare, I guess, the tender, and the process that exists behind that. So, it's a bit like, if you like, we could say it's a bit like you're going to purchase a new car. You don't just walk out one day and decide to do it and go out to the car yard. Well, you might, but there is often a lot of thought process in terms of identifying the need to purchase the car, really trying to get your head around, well, what sort of car do I need, and what are the requirements that do I need it to have? Is it a family car, a sports car, one to use for work? And all of these things are what the government or the business really, I guess, thinks about before it submits the tender. So by the time the tender arrives on our desk, it really should contain a lot of information about what is important to that client and what it is that they're looking for. And the client also will determine, before it submits the tender, exactly what approach they will take to the market. Now, by that I mean they may take a limited approach, in that if they are not sure how many suppliers are out there to provide them with the goods or services, then they may issue what we call an expression of interest, and that is, if you like, a bit of a fishing expedition. They ask the market who is out there that can actually supply the goods or services that we might need. And rather than a full tender, an expression of interest is a shorter version, where you go back and you say, yes, we have the capability to do this. A good example of that is, a friend of mine actually is a distributor and supplier of inflatable water parks. Now, there's not that many companies in Australia that actually bring in water parks that councils then buy and put up in their local area. So when the council decided it wanted a water park for its local area, it wasn't really sure how many suppliers were out there. And so through their understanding of the market, the client will determine what type of tender it will take to go to market. Typically, what we're talking about are, if you like, what we call an RFT or an RFP, which is a request for proposal or a request for tender. And they are typically identified by the fact that they've got a price associated with them. You have to submit a price for the goods or services, and information about how you're going to supply them. So once the client receives those responses back, they then evaluate them and award a contract, and then manage that contract through to the end of term. So from our point of view, this is exactly where, I guess, our role starts to interplay with the client's side, when that tender is issued and when we decide that we're going to actually bid for it. So if you like, the tender document becomes the connect between the buyer, in terms of what it is that they want to purchase, whatever goods or services they're wanting to purchase, and then them awarding a contract to the supplier that they think is going to do the best job. And it's through that tender document that they make their determination as to which supplier is going to best fit their purpose. And as we said, typically what makes up a tender is a price for the goods or services and the non-price elements. and we're going to talk a bit about these elements today. But basically, you will get a score for the price and the non-price elements, and the client will determine which tenderer is the preferred supplier based on those scores. So let's have a look now at a tender readiness assessment in terms of how ready is your business, or what does it need to get ready to start tendering effectively. So quickly, we're going to have a look of the benefits and the risks. And we all know the benefits, otherwise we probably would not be here today to really, we know that opportunities to win business through contracts, particularly government contracts, offer opportunities to grow our businesses sustainably. They offer good payment terms, more secure payment terms, and potentially, what we have in terms of the other side of the market. It gives us access to a wide range of opportunities that we may not have had access to if we weren't tendering, as well as new clients and revenue basis. And as part of the tendering process, we actually are required to give back to the community. So nowadays in our tender responses, we're asked to identify some of the economic benefits our proposal might provide, as well as some of the social benefits our proposals will provide. And these are very specific questions in the tender document, but it's actually law now, or it was a United Nations standard that was issued that said if governments are spending public money, there needs to be some social benefit coming back from those contracts. There are many risks at tendering, but some of the key risks is that you submit the tender and you're not compliant. You may submit under budget. You may not have what we call a tender strategy. So you may not have thought about your business and how it could position itself best in the tender. Obviously, unsuccessful tenders take away time and cost and effort from your business. And you might commit and submit a fantastic tender, but if you can't deliver the contract, then there are all sorts of ramifications associated with that. I'm going to play this video. I'm hoping that everyone will be able to hear it.
What makes tendering challenging is that there are many contributing elements to a winning bid. It is important to keep in mind that tenders are a commercial, compliance, and a sales and marketing document in one. Your offer needs to be a quality conforming proposal that will show how your company will deliver benefits and low risk to the client over the term of the contract, while also meeting the requirements at a sharp price. As such, your response needs to be compliant, that is, conform to the tender rules, meet the tender requirements, and contain all the information requested. It also needs to be competitive, so make sure your price is as sharp as possible and your approach provides value for money that helps the client meet its objectives. And also, compelling. You need to highlight your company's capabilities and experience relevant to the contract and sell the benefits of your solution in a persuasive form.
This is what I actually really enjoy about tendering. I like it because it is a challenging process, and you really, the typical tender or typical tender period on average is about 3 weeks. And it really, and I guess when we're talking about taking time away from the business, it may not take you, full time for those 3 weeks to complete, but it does take you a significant period of time is to read the documents, understand what the client is asking for, what you need to submit back. And it's that process of if you like, unraveling, the client's requirements and objectives, and then putting them back in return in a really high quality submission. So that's, I guess, me being a bit of a tender nerd, that's what I like about the process. But let's go through some of these key elements here that we need for compliance. And that is when the first thing that we need to do in terms of answering a tender is to meet the mandatory requirements. So there'll be, as part of the tender document, there will be what they call mandatory information included at the front of it. And these are things like that are on your screen, like what's your business name, what's your ABN, what's your contact details. They need to substantiate that you are an accredited or a registered business. It's the client doing its due diligence. Um, they will often want to see accreditations or licenses that you are able to do the work that you are tendering for. They will want to see that you have your relevant insurances. Sometimes they'll ask for copies of the certificates, otherwise they'll just ask for policy names, policy numbers, and limits. And sometimes they will ask you for financials. So it could be 2 to 3 years of your financials. And I get a lot of small businesses that say, why? Why do we have to give them our information? But again, what the client is looking for in the tender document is to select a preferred supplier. And all they've got to go off is what information you supply in the tender document. And they want to be able to make the best informed decision about that you're going to be able to come in and deliver the contract over the term. So it's about managing their risk. And they want to make sure with all of this that you are a legitimate business, that you have the financial capacity and all of the right elements in line to do the job that's part of the contract. So with the mandatory requirements, often what they'll say in a tender, if you don't meet those, we won't even evaluate the other parts of your tender. So some of the other parts of the tender that we need to, tick off, if you like, is that we've got to answer all the questions in the document. We've got to, if you like, show how we're going to meet the requirements of the contract. So in the tender document, they give us a draft contract to review. So they are the terms and conditions that we will agree to or commit to if we win the contract. Plus, then there's typically a scope of works or a specification that tells us how exactly we're going to buy or deliver those goods or services. And when we answer the questions, we've actually got to reference those requirements and tell them how we're going to deliver them as part of our response. We need to review that contract that they've provided, that draft contract, and outline any non-conformances or any items of that contract that we cannot conform to. So say, for example, if you're, let's say you're in building and they put forward a requirement in the contract that said you must use X type of material in the subfloor. But we know that X type of material is no longer available in the marketplace. It's actually been replaced by an upgraded version. So we're not going to be able to legitimately meet that requirement in the contract. So we would have to tell them the reasons why for that. Often we are marked on the number of non-conformances we put in our response. But the example I just gave you, really typically you wouldn't necessarily be marked down because it's simply not possible. One of the non-conformances you might be marked down for would be something like we don't accept the risk that you've provided in the contract. One of the minimum requirements is, the information that they're asking for in the tender document is really trying to draw out your experience and your capacity and your capability as an organisation to deliver the contract. And we'll have a look at some examples of I guess, the questions you are asked. But I guess from here, I would say that your business has to have some level of relevant experience doing the job that you are going for. And it needs to be able to show it has some capability in that area in terms of the skills and the knowledge and the systems that it has in place. And it's got the capacity. So, if you're going for a contract to start a new mine, for example, you need to have the equipment and the team ready, and be able to tell the client that you've got that capacity to deliver that contract. And you've got to be able to, as part of your response, present a competitive price for the product or service that you're selling. And that takes some understanding of, being able to benchmark that against the competition or against what industry standards are. So on the screen here, we've got just an example, what we call some evaluation criteria. So when the person that's reading the tender response, the evaluator, will read your response, and then they will give it a score, potentially out of 10 or out of 100, on how well you've met the requirements. And then each of the sections, if you like, have a weighting associated with them. Now, sometimes you don't know what that weighting is, but in this example, you can see on my, I'll just move my thing here. Experience is worth overall 30%. The resources and capacity is worth 30%. WHS is worth 20. And this is from a local council tender. Your corporate social responsibility and all of these elements here are worth 20%. So we get an understanding of what is most important to the client by looking at the evaluation criteria and how, what type of weighting they put against it. Often they don't include the weighting. They might just have a list like this. So we may not ever know which criteria is more important. But the criteria are important, are very important in themselves, obviously, because it's what they use to score our response. But it also tells us what are the key important elements of the project for the client. So in terms of, we looked at some of the, I guess, the other requirements in the document, but what we need to do as part of our response is actually generate a whole lot of information to include in our response. So these are things like for the experience questions, and I'll show you an example of one in a moment. They will ask you for information of typically 2 to 3 past contracts, similar contracts that you've delivered to the one that's being tendered for. Potentially, they will also ask you for a contact within those contracts or other contracts that you can provide as referees for your business. When they're asking about your key people, you might need to show an org chart. You might need to provide CVs. When they ask for your methodology, how are you going to deliver this product or how are you going to deliver this service, you need to be able to articulate or describe how it is that you do the job that you do. What processes do you have in place to do the job? When it comes to safety and environment and quality, they're typically always included, or sections always included in tenders. You're going to be asked for things like, do you have a safety policy? Do you have an environmental policy? Or do you have an organisational work health and safety plan? So these are, I guess, some of the core elements that we're asked for. Sure, Jody, sorry about the video. Yeah. Then also, sometimes they will ask us whether you have a safety management system or a quality management system. Now, sometimes depending on the value and the complexity of the tender, they might ask you to have an ISO accredited or a third-party accredited system. Not all tenders require that, and sometimes they may ask you the question, and you can still say, no, we don't have one, or yes, we do have one, or that we have a system set up that is, in alignment with the principles of an ISO system. So again, this would really depend on each tender and which client you're going for. And without, I guess, getting into too much detail, there are these elements around the social benefits that your tender can deliver. So this sort of section of the tender is called Social Procurement, Modern Slavery and Sustainability. So I was just actually, I'm helping a client at the moment with a tender. It's actually for the Victorian government. And they've actually got the contract at the moment. So they have had to report for the last 6 years or 4 years or whatever it's been on social procurement statistics. So things like how many Aboriginal or Indigenous people do they have employed in their organisation? How many people with a disability do they have within their organisation? How many small businesses they employ? And these elements are becoming more and more, well, becoming typical commonplace now in terms of those requirements in our tender. And without wanting to alarm you, because there are, as a small business, often you cannot simply, you may not have the full capacity to have to be able to answer these questions, I guess, in the way that they would like you to. But I guess what we want to talk about here is having some systems and commitments in place to increase the participation of Aboriginal people and Aboriginal businesses within your business. Modern slavery is really around ensuring that your supply chain, or you have some policies, modern slavery policies set up to make sure that you can, the supply chain, the people that you're buying your goods and services from, that you can be assured that they are free from modern slavery. And then sustainability was what are the, I guess, the sustainability elements or environmental elements that you can add that will help to protect the environment. And again, every tender will be different in terms of the level and the type of information that you're required. On screen is just a typical example of one of a tender question. So it's basically asking here for our experience and that we are to describe the experience that we have in the provision of works that are similar to the work that will be required to perform under the agreement, including your experience working with local government clients. So this is a local government tender. And I forgot to say that one of the challenging things, or one of the things that we find most challenging about tenders is the wording. Because it's not simple. It's not our everyday conversational wording. It's contractual, compliance-based wording. And often what we find challenging is that questions can be written in an ambiguous and challenging way. Sometimes there can be multiple questions within the question. But carrying on here, so it's asked us as the respondent to describe our experience in services of a similar nature and value, so similar scope and value, that you've completed in the last 3 years. And then you can see here the type of information that they want. And that is, I guess, fairly typical or very typical of what you would be asked for in a tender. And in fact, if you're looking at a tender and, one of the things, and you're wondering, can we win this tender? One of the things I do or would encourage you to do is to look at the questions and see, okay, well, they want, in this case, there was 3 examples they wanted. Do we have 3 examples over the last 3 years of similar contracts? And if we don't, we know that we're not going to get a very high score in this section. And then, we make our decision on what some of the other questions there are as to whether or not we think it's worthwhile our effort to tender. So understanding the process. So, as I said before, there's typically an average of about 3 weeks for tenders. I've worked on ones that are 3 months. It depends on the client and again of the complexity of the tender. And you would think the complexity often dictates the term as well as the value of the contract. The other thing we need to make sure of is that they set clear rules and guidelines that we need to follow when we're responding. So, for example, we can't just ring them up and ask a question. There would be a designated communications channel that if we've got any questions about what's in the document that we need to follow. there might be some site briefings that we need to attend. So that might be, sometimes they make those mandatory. So I referenced earlier around cleaning. A lot of cleaning contracts, they have mandatory site briefings that you would need to attend. I guess there's guidance on how you need to submit the tender documents. So nowadays, a lot of tenders are submitted electronically and often by through a portal. So, there's no use writing or making a Word document look pretty if you've got to upload it to an online portal, because often it doesn't take any pictures or any type of colors. And it depends, I'm working on a couple of documents at the moment and they are in Word format. So you can you can have pictures, you can have different colors, and you've got the freedom to make it look as attractive as possible. And if you like, you've got to submit it on time in that format, and it's got to be a good looking document or a professional looking document. And I've actually got an example of that in a moment, but I guess you could probably, maybe ascertain just by what we've spoken about that it does take time and effort to put your best foot forward in these documents. And it does take you away often then from your day business. Um, and the information often that's in the document needs to come from the subject matter experts or expert within your business. If you're putting together a plumbing tender, you need a plumber to help you write a lot of the information, or to write most of the information. Some of the other jobs that there are in terms of the tendering process, someone's got to do the pricing, maybe getting pricing or quotes from subbies. You've got to review that contract. So you need to review that with a legal perspective. You need to write the responses and the answers to the question, and you need to bring it together in a format that looks presentable. I just put an example of this was actually not a real tender. It was a tender I used for training, but I just wanted to show you briefly, some of the formats that we might use to, in terms of what looks professional. What hasn't changed with tenders is that they are largely word-based documents. So even though they might set us page limits, they are words, lots of words on pages, and it's our job to try and make them as interesting to the person that's reading them, because they're not only reading yours, but they're reading others as well. So diagrams and graphics and some colors just help to break it up for the reader and make it more engaging. Okay, we're hopefully all, thinking we can be ready to tender. Let's look at the next step. So who are our buyers? And this is, I think, one of the most important things, really being able to identify your ideal tender client. I get approached by a lot of people or a lot of business owners that say, I want to start tendering. And, the questions I ask them is, well, how long have you been in business? What type of experience do you have? And, what type of contracts you've won? Because that will give me an idea as to exactly where you are best placed to start tendering. And it also depends on the nature of your business. So if your business is supplying online training, like mine, for example, I could tender for organizations, geographically it doesn't matter. But if I'm a construction business and I'm building buildings within an LGA or several LGAs, well, of course, that will restrict or which organizations we're going to tender to. But importantly, what we want to find is the tenders that we have the greatest chance of winning and delivering. So lots of policy procurement talk here for a moment, but it's important for us to understand, because there are a lot of opportunities, particularly when we're starting out, and I'm going to say under the threshold value. So what's the threshold? So every government client or government organisation will have their own policy, and they'll set their own threshold value. So typically, local government, they'll say if there is a contract that they want to go to tender, if the contract's value is over $250,000, by their procurement policy, they've got to go out to an open competitive tender, which means anybody or any organisation, sorry, can go for it. If that contract value is under $250,000, they don't have to go out to an open forum. They can go out in a limited way. And a limited way, I'll explain if I go to the next screen, is that often they can go out to those suppliers who are registered on as a registered supplier, whether it be registered for a council or a state government or a federal government. So, for example, if I'm registered as a supplier on my local council, as a supplier through my local council, then potentially I am able to go for tenders under that threshold amount. Often what they will have though are panel setups. So a panel setup is, or a scheme as they're called, is a group of pre-approved suppliers, so that they might have, for example, a plumbing panel. Don't want to say that too many times today, but if they have a plumbing panel of, say, 10 plumbing organisations within the local government area, if the contract values are under $250,000, they'll go out to those panel members and ask just for a request for quote. So it makes the process more efficient for the client because they're not going out for tender. They've already pre-qualified these organisations on the panel. And this is a really, really good place to start if you, if you're a plumber, for example, and you're trying to win contracts, government contracts, registering or going for panel or to be on a panel is a great way to start to build your portfolio of government contracts. What is the key thing here, though, is that even if they don't have a panel, we need to be registered as a supplier for that particular council or state government or federal government to even be considered. So we're talking about New South Wales Small Business Month. Thank you to the New South Wales government for having me as a presenter. But the New South Wales government, like the federal government, also have policies in place to encourage small business, businesses to apply for tenders and to give them award them tenders. And in fact, they can award tenders to an SME that's registered as a supplier directly from their database. So if you're not already registered with the New South Wales government as a supplier, then register and provide your details, because you will get access to the opportunities that come through now. How do I say this? There are a lot of policies around this, and it's not that it's very easy to identify which jobs are there for the small business that are under $250,000, but you've got to register as a supplier to start to take advantage of those. And it's a similar concept at a federal government level as well. So there are other opportunities in the supply chain a lot of the time with if we're tendering towards for business, to be part of the supply chain down the line. So as the principal contractor is the one that typically holds the main contract with the government. Particularly this is for, like, say, large contract construction jobs. So the principal contractor might be like a tier 1 construction company. and they will have a package of works that might be, 40 or 60 packages for a very large contract. And they will award those to a host of significant contractors or subcontractors. So there's opportunities there to get a part of the, I guess, the process. And there's also opportunity to subcontract into these significant contracts. And this is a system that's set up and works across defence as well. So, if you're in a defence area, for example, I'm located today near the Williamtown RAF base near Newcastle. So there are a lot of what they call prime contractors. So your large, very large international, national, multinational businesses. So, but there is opportunity, and because they also need to buy local, there is opportunity for local suppliers or subbies to get involved with some of these projects, but often we just need to know how. So a couple of ways we can do that, actually, just sorry, going back here. So here are some of the addresses in terms of where to register as a supplier for government. So New South Wales government, federal government. eProcure and Vendor Panel are free portals that a lot of local councils use now to issue their tenders. So, for example, if I go onto my local council site, all the tenders are accessed through this third-party portal, and I submit my tender back through that portal. So I've got to go in and sign up for these panels to get access to the tenders, but I can also set some parameters in here, and I can get notified of particular tenders from surrounding councils or whatever area that I want in the different categories that I want as well. So in this case, these are all free. So by law, they're all free. And the other thing I'll tell you as well, which is a really good place to start if you're in the process of starting to tender, is that again by law, all of these levels of government have to publish past contract information. So on your local government website, there should be contracts that have been awarded over that threshold value in the last several years. That is really helpful to be able to understand. So say, for example, you're a street sweeper and your local council, the big street sweeping contract is coming up for renewal. I'm definitely picking the difficult examples with wording today. I can go on to my local council and I can look back, say 3 years ago, and see that street sweeping tender or contract was issued for $500,000 to X company. So that gives me an understanding, obviously, of who the supplier is and what the value of that contract is. So going now back again to business. So there are two elements here, or two pathways that we can register. Both of these, ICN Gateway is a government organisation or a government platform. We'll have a look at this in a moment. And you can register for free, but there are other paid avenues within that. Estimate One is a sort of a private business, but it's used mostly in the construction space. But it does where I was describing before, it has a lot of organisations that are going for big government jobs will advertise the packages of work on Estimate One, and you can supply a quote for that, and they use that quote as part of their tender, and that you can potentially win work that way. But let's have a look at ICN Gateway. This was an example from a job that's being delivered at the moment. So what happens here is that this is the large, if you like, a large contract that's in the beginning it was for the extension of the M1 motorway. So this is the organisation that's won the tender. Now you can see here, these are closed, but of course they're closed because they were 2023. But these are all the packages that they need, that they are subbing out. So, you get down to landscaping, all sorts of things. And then once they're awarded, you are able to see who those contracts are awarded to as well. So, say if I'm a local landscaping supply business and I see that there's been there's a Jim's Landscaping that's won this contract, but I'm a local landscaping business. I'm going to ring Jim's and say, hey, if you guys need anything while you're delivering that work, we've got, heaps of materials that we can supply to you. Now, Jim's Landscaping, as well as John Holland and Gamuda, have requirements to buy from local businesses. So anything that they can get will help them to meet their targets for buying from local business. And this is where also those social procurement elements come in. So if you are an organisation that provides people with disability into employment, these are ways that we can go about accessing large contracts through that. So, tenders are, you look at them as their marketing. They're part of our business development, in terms of business development activities. And sometimes we need to do some, door knocking to get some answers. And nowadays, I'm sure everyone's tried to ring their bank or ring somebody, and you can't find a telephone number for anybody, and no one wants to talk to you these days. And it's the same, I mean, the procurement teams, the people that issue the tender, it's a cloak and dagger situation. They don't want to talk to us too much because they might be in the middle of a tender and they're trying to keep it all fair and all the rest of it. But if I'm a plumber and I want to find out how my local council buys plumbing services, I want to register as a plumber with my local council, but I want to know I've registered. Am I going to get any work? So, I would say look at the past contracts, because sometimes what they do is, as I said, they might have one single plumbing contract that's over that threshold, that's over that $250,000. Say for the plumbing services for my local council, it might be a $2 million contract, or it might be a handful of plumbers as part of a panel. But I want to know that, I want to be able to identify and position myself for those plumbing contracts, or try to get myself on the panel. So, these things, ask your council if you can, chat with the bot or email the customer service people and say, how do you buy plumbing services? I'm really interested in working out, when the next panel's coming on, or do you have, do you know when the next tender is available? A lot of these government organisations too, if you go onto your local council page and type tenders, there'll be a page or a section around tenders. Sometimes they will have a forward procurement schedule, so they'll tell you in advance of what some of the contracts are coming up. So it's always obviously worthwhile checking there. We have a partnership with Australian Tenders. Australian Tenders are basically a private business that what you would call an affiliate. So you pay a yearly subscription and you get access to tenders from local government, from state government, from federal, for private business. So it basically means that you can set your parameters in there and search, get delivered tenders to your email box that meet your criteria without having to do a lot of the searching, perhaps at the other opportunities. So okay, so we're setting ourselves up again. So we've identified our ideal client. We want to have a look at some example tenders. So um, go on to any of your government websites and pull down a tender. You can have a look to see, what they're like, what type of information they're asking for, the requirements, what does the actual document look like? What is it asking for? And all those elements there, the evaluation criteria, how are they going to pay you? All the bits of stuff that you've got to submit back. So one of the other things that I guess is important before you start tendering is often that, online due diligence. So just as they want to know that you're a credible business when you submit the tender, they might do a search to make sure that you've got a website. And it's always good that we have a digital footprint that confirms our legitimacy as a business and that it reflects the online material or our online presence reflects the goods or services that we're going to tender for. So again, if I'm a residential plumbing business and I'm trying to win council plumbing services, I want to talk about potentially my capability in commercial plumbing. And this goes to the point that when we start to tender, obviously we're going to use a lot of information about our business. And this slide is around, okay, well, all these bits and pieces here are things that we can get asked about. Do we want to get that all together, some of that information together before we start tendering? Because I want to go and tender for this particular job. I've got 3 weeks and I've got none of this information together. So it does make it a bit more stressful if you're trying to get the information together on the hop. What I haven't sort of talked about here is really about, you've got, this is the standard information that you need to have, if you like, potentially. But you've also got to be able to understand what your unique or the strengths are of your business and how you can present them in a way that is going to be of value to the client. So again, if you've got 6 plumbing businesses all competing for one plumbing job, if they can all meet the requirements of the tender, well, how on earth are they going to differentiate those responses? So, you've got to think about the things that make your business and your offering unique and special and what value you add to the end client at the end of the day. So again, a lot of us aren't tender experts. We might be expert plumbers or engineers or what have you, but think about, the process that you can go through to really understand the fundamentals of tendering. And there's a classic example, and it could have been a mistake that could have cost this company, I'm going to say millions of dollars. But I was working on a large tender this year for a pretty big client, and one of the people in the team had not tendered before, and they emailed one of the clients, someone on the client's team basically, and said, "Hey, if we win this tender, let's do this together." Now, it doesn't go any further than that, but that is, the worst thing you can do, because you could be thrown out of the whole process for non-compliance or non-conformance. The documents are complex. As we've found out, having an understanding of what they're asking for. So thinking about also knowing, the process that you're going to apply, who's going to help you put this tender together, and do they have the skills that you need before you start. So we're pretty much set to go. So we're starting to tender. So these are the things that we really want to really know before we submit or start, I guess, to look at or when we're looking at each tender document, what are our chances of winning? So we call this, I guess, a go, no go process. And it basically you looking at the tender document, you're reading it, and you're trying to give yourself an understanding of, do we have any chance, do you think, of winning it? Is it relating, is it part of our core business? When we read those tender questions, can we meet all of those, do we have 3 projects in the last 3 years that show our experience? Well, who are the competitors and how are they going to bid this? What's it going to cost us to tender, or what's it going to cost us in terms of the contract delivery? What experience do we have and what capacity, to deliver? So, what's our likelihood of winning the tender? And then what we also need to consider, what's the likelihood if we win, can we deliver the contract? So, what we put in that tender document and what we submit at that final moment is what we have to deliver if we win. So that's what we're contractually committing ourselves to. So there's no going back from there. There might be some negotiation around the price and that, once you're confirmed, but what you've written is what you have to deliver. And often the things that might catch people are things like the reporting requirements. So, it might be that you've got to submit a report. A friend of mine actually works with a client, and she puts together the monthly report for them, and they do weed spraying in Queensland. So they're out, spraying weeds by the side of the road and railway tracks and all the rest of it. Well, the nature of the report can be up to like 70 or 80 pages in terms of photos each month for the government client. So it's just those sorts of things that I'm sure we can cater for that if we win it, but it's thinking about those requirements and meeting those requirements, and I guess, making sure that we can successfully plan for the future in terms of what that contract requires. I've talked a lot. I'd love to hear some questions. Has anybody got some questions that they would like to ask? Let me just stop share here. I will send around, thanks, Michelle. I will send around afterwards a copy of the slides and from my email. So if you've got anything that you want to ask, just send something back that way. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining me today, and yeah, successful. Here's to a successful business and successful tendering. So thanks so much for your time. See you later.